Of all the positions in Aussie rules, which is the most difficult to play? You could say it's a ruckman who's worn down physically as knees collide, working from contest to contest. You could say it's a wingman who won't always get their praise but runs their guts out weekly. But I say it's the half-forward flank. Why? These players need to be skilled in many areas. They must go up the ground to support an exit out of the back 50. They must deflect attention away from the tall timber in their forward line. They must have the IQ and nous to read the ball in the air and crumb the football. They must provide pressure and work over their opponents. They must stop their opponents from running off and having an impact higher up the ground. And aside from all that, they must hit the scoreboard. Sometimes getting the footy or having an impact can be hard to come by. And this is a position Carlton were not getting anything out of for weeks. But the forgotten trio of David Cuningham, Lachie Fogarty and Jack Martin, who all weren't in the side prior to round 13, have transformed the way in which we've played. Due to doing all the things I've just mentioned that are imperative. Let's break it down. The biggest thing out of those stats for me are score involvements, which are classed as the number of scoring chains where a player was involved with either a disposal, hit out to advantage, kick in or knock on, according to champion data. It's no coincidence that with these guys coming in and putting in a shift with their score involvement, our scoring is lifted, particularly coming out of the back half where we scored 24 points from this area in this game. An area where we didn't score a goal from in 3 weeks. We've mentioned the importance of the half forward coming up the ground to support, be an option, and aid the back half exit, and this was done to good effect by this trio. On this goal we kicked from end to end, it takes an unorthodox approach from previous weeks. Harry is led wide and Charlie's up the ground. Usually would be a bit stumped and have no focal point. But having a Jack Martin lead at the footy and Harry lead out here, the pass further afield is unexpected. It's partially reliant on the midfield group making the right decisions, but it's equally reliant on the forwards knowing the time to lead and the directions to run, which was done to perfection on this possession. Positioning is quite important too. I noticed when our half forwards pushed up, they'd be occupying positions in the corridor, flagging that's an area of high threat and that's where you want your extra numbers. And it's also the best spot to launch your attack from. This is a great example as Fogarty cuts off the impact of a Darcy hit out, you know he'll win, and he'll knock down into a dangerous spot. This is unrelated, but Jack Martin making an impact play here to win it at an initial point of disadvantage is so vital, and we actually score a goal from it. Here's another example where Jack Martin this time is the relief for Cripper, and Fremantle allow it, wanting to hold back as they know that's where the play is headed. I've no clue what Jordan Clark is doing here, leaving Fog open for an easy kick into the most central part of the ground. Obviously, we talked about that positioning before, and another goal follows. Here's one of my favourites. The Carlton mids got it off the flank into a more centralised area, where our wider players have run off, and we've been more reactive to the move than Freo. Fog's involved in drawing the man and getting Cincotta open, and then feeds it to him. Martin supplements the play by getting even wider towards the fat side. And then accelerating the play, Fog's in the forward line crumbing the footy almost flawlessly, whilst Cunners is hitting the score sheet, albeit not the maximum. Without those three, I don't think we're getting a play as fluid as this weeks ago. A glaring issue in the losing streak was supposed imbalance across the field. With these three players, they fit seamlessly into how our midfield sets up, or wants to set up. It provides a lot of flexibility as all three can hold their own at the stoppage as a midfielder, exploiting the inexperience of players like Johnson and Erasmus, whilst giving our true midfielders a quick rest for minimal loss. As you can see through centre bounce attendances, it's not much, but there is value in having forwards who can do this sparingly. In a more natural position, they can also serve as the extra number at the same stoppage whilst being a half forward. Simultaneously, they can navigate the stoppage, have an impact whilst also discomforting their direct matchup, as it is a position of unfamiliarity for them. You can see an example like this where Hayden Young is happier to take a further vantage point whilst Cunners is comfortable coming up to the contest because he knows he can do damage in there. He doesn't do damage, but there are plenty of chances for him to apply himself. Take this example also where Cunners brings Young up to the contest. He nullifies the influence of the Freo number, whilst paving the way for a direct path forward. I feel like a specialist forward, especially the young forwards we have, are not really possessed with this awareness. Habitually, they'd be more inclined to swoop on this footy and not necessarily hold their teammate out and act more defensively. And look, it's great Cunners can run the length of the field in seconds and have that goal sense despite having made an impact at the contest seconds earlier. For halfback flankers like Young, you'd want the space to run and gain territory and use a thumping kick. But to get this, they'd have to be willing to compromise Freo's chances of winning the ball by giving up the extra number. In evening up the contest, that desired space disappears and they enter uncharted waters. You can see an example of Cunners having the intuition to read the play, whilst Young looks a bit lost in there. The versatility of these half forwards allowed seamless switches in open play, like on this example where Fogg starts in the centre bounce, only for him 15 seconds later to have switched to his default position for Sam Walsh, who got that bit of rest he needed. Or in forward line stoppages, like this example where Kennedy, Martin and Fogg switch places on this one. And that was at the core of how Jack Martin was most effective in the forward 50, who was incredibly assertive in these kinds of situations as we were properly setting up plays and were actively trying to make shit happen with him involved. This is one where he loses his opponent momentarily as he bypasses Akers and was able to get use. And on this example, he uses the body to slowly send Young backward, and then with momentum in that action he breaks free, and ultimately we actually score from that forward line stoppage. I also liked this really subtle thing Jack Martin did on numerous occasions, sometimes more obvious than others. Just a simple block in marking contests helped benefit his teammate over himself, akin to what Cunners did with that Kennedy clearance earlier. And on this example, you can see that once he commits the act, his mind is already in the next part of the possession, as you can see him sprinting, trying to get involved again whilst Harry is advantaged, given the circumstances. Obviously that isolated one-on-one type situation. I also like the 666 at centre bounces, the concept of the half forward flank running up to the stoppage. Usually this is the kind of formation we take from centre bounces, so the half forwards are best positioned to do this. They're able to add some congestion and add an obstacle to Freo's clearance methods, especially if they need that relief from a half-back flanker running off, or from a midfielder sitting more defensively at the back of the stoppage. The half-forwards coming up the ground also vacates the space for Harry and Charlie. Against a Fremantle defence that aren't as tall, or nearly as mobile as these two, putting them in isolation spelled problems for the home side, and it was a no-brainer to employ the structure we did on Sunday for that very reason. You can see when they enter the frame, Fogg is fresh off a short lead along the boundary, whilst Martin leads positively into this space, which would keep us away from the death that is the pockets. Charlie did well to separate here as well. Harry outmuscled Alex Pearce on many occasions, so having a high ball sent to an isolated one-on-one benefits us greatly. You can see on this example our half forwards have the mindset of running back with the mids to help defensively. So when we regain possession, the forward line is incredibly open for Charlie to present here into space, and then Harry to also be isolated here. I also found it particularly impressive that this trio applied as much forward half pressure as they did. In the first half of the first quarter alone, the Blues had 9 tackles to 0 in the forward 50. And that could be partially attributed to these three. This example is particularly encouraging where Jack Martin cuts off an outlet to the spare Erasmus, which leads to a tougher exit. Jack Martin did well to react to dropped marks a few times on the day, and Fogarty follows up with an excellent tackle, whilst Martin also gets his hands on it as a part of some more follow-up work. You can see on this example, Harry loses his footing, so JSOS must fight a 2-on-1, which, as per my analysis last week, he's pretty good at. Fogg does well to pressure and actually gets a hand to this with his attack on the footy, and Jack Martin also closes down quickly to mount further pressure as the ball will re-enter the 50. This late game Fogg example is exceptional. Even though Owies ultimately forces the turnover, Clark doesn't really have any other choice than to barely possess it because of fog, and that quick thinking required can sometimes make you choose this option over this option. And so we score from it as a result of the forward half turnover. Pushing up the ground does a lot more than just aiding the exit out of the back half or opening the space for Charlie and Harry. Defensively, it can also shut down that attacking threat some of the best halfback flankers possess. One player who could have changed the game potentially was Hayden Young, so it's particularly comforting when players like Jack Martin understand the scouting report and block that pathway to goal off. Ultimately, they get a goal anyway, but it could have been a hell of a lot easier. Or it could have a more obvious impact like this, where Sean Darcy was open inside 50 for centuries, but Jack Martin neutralises that contest, having come high up the ground, and Cunners is also there to supply a chain out of the back half on the initial exit out the 50, and then again by getting a mark and switching the play. Jack Martin, who allowed this pushback to happen, worked his backside off to get the mark here, and funnily enough, this is the play where Carlton's socials documented Walshy's 200-metre run on this play. Deeper lying though are these guys getting back defensively, and then, like we mentioned earlier, feeding our movement from end to end with their work rate. And obviously, we can't forget these guys are forwards, so they've got forward craft. They know where to be at the right time, and they have hit the scoreboard in recent weeks. That said, it hasn't necessarily been the goals that have done the talking, but the minute details which have got it done, and the forward craft has aided this. If we refer back to their stats from the last 3 weeks, score involvements have been a staple of this trio's performances, and it's clear Carlton is a better side when players of this mould are doing this so frequently. Even though this doesn't directly lead to a score, this late game Jack Martin example sort of sums this up. Roving the ball, spinning out of trouble, then he is still on the ground before he gets up and steams in for another forward line tackle. Overall, I think we're strongly benefiting from versatility. It's a luxury when these guys have drastic forward impact because they know what they're doing, but then can also go into the midfield and have the same impact because they know what they're doing. Output from the smaller forward positions is something we've lacked, but this versatility has really aided the flexibility of what we can do. And the ceiling for improvement in the way in which we perform has been heavily elevated. Whilst there are definitely other areas that have lifted in correlation with team performance, this is one area I look at as a prime reason for the wins we've gotten in recent weeks. If you enjoyed this one, drop a like and subscribe to stay tuned for next week's analysis following our big match against the Power. If you think you've got Carlton mates that would be interested in this sort of stuff, make sure to share it around. Thanks for tuning in, enjoy your day, and bye for now.